Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is a Little Blue Book. It just happens to be Little Blue Book number 112, and it is titled The Secret of Self-Development, written by John Cowper Powys, and it's P-O-W-Y-S. That's why I always hesitate. Now, this is copyright 1926, and this is part 3. And this is going to be a short part because it's just a short little new chapter in here, written by a different writer, so here we go. Let me see if I can find it. Alrighty. Now I know we left off on page 26, and here's the new chapter, The Revolt from Knowledge by Isaac Goldberg. There comes a moment of despair in the lives of all true students when they are overwhelmed by the mountains of fact before which they have to bow. Learning is long and life is fleeting. Many scholars indeed, and the true scholar, however arrogant he may be before his fellow man, has a proper sense of humility in the presence of fact. Experience an almost periodical reoccurrence of this sense of hopeless inferiority. It was Bertrand Russell, I believe, who wrote that nothing was so efficacious in the cure of man's egotism as a little study in astronomy. One's sense of proportion is restored, and it is a sense of proportion, I think, that is at the root of the true sense of humor. To exclusive preoccupation with the things of the mind induces at least a revolt, and there has been in our recent writing more than one sign of such reaction. One of the latest is the article entitled Unction for the Uneducated by Charles A. Bennett in the Saturday Review of Literature for July 17th, 1926. Mr. Bennett is in a moment of revolt that manages to retain its sense of humor, grows not appalled but surely concerned at the heap of knowledge that is accumulating for the younger generation to assimilate. Confronted by this maddening array of facts, he seeks refuge in fiction. In a word, he argues for a return from intellect to intuition, from outlook, as one might say, to insight. It is not a new view, but it has its special significance in our day. Bennett, summing up his case, ends upon a bucolic note, like a city man released at last from the confusion of the metropolis and planted with both feet firmly in the pasture beside a running stream. But in all this, what solace or help is there for us, who are bewildered by outlines, or for the boy of 11 setting out on that interminable journey from Neolithic man to the Conference of Versailles? Why is there a question mark there? Let me reread that. But in all this, what solace or help is there for us who are bewildered by outlines, or for the boy of 11 setting out on that interminable journey from Neolithic man to the Conference of Versailles? Okay. Well, at least one may be brought back to a realization that there is another way of knowledge, not less difficult perhaps, but certainly more hopeful, so that, even though we may never fill in our outlines, we may yet win some insight. Yeah, okay, I lost that one. So that perhaps, but certainly more helpful, so that even though we may never fill in our outlines, we may yet win some insight that is worth having. And for whom shall we learn? And from whom shall we learn? From the poets and the musicians. We cannot ourselves I cannot read right now. We cannot ourselves write poetry or music, but we can become receptive until in us there is evoked the mood or the vision. Nowadays, a man of vision has come to mean some expert in city planning, or the like, who lays out the streets with a view to the estimated increase in population 50 years hence. But the only men of vision are the artists, who give us not expanse but depth of knowledge. imagination, penetration, insight, divination. These are all the names for that other dimension of knowledge, familiar to the East, but which the restless, curious, industrious, and unsatisfied West denies or ignores. But poets and creative artists of all ages and all countries are at home in it. To them, therefore, we shall go, for in no other way shall we learn wisdom as distinct from knowledge. Mere accumulation of experience will not teach it. Kipling, with all his cosmopolitan familiarity with mankind, for all his study of human motive, succeeds only in being knowing. By contrast with Kipling, the Brontes lived the lives of the recluse, but to which will you turn if you seek an insight into human nature? And so, if I ever find that schoolboy appalled at the thought that while he has done Egypt, the Assyrians and the Babylonians still lie in wait for him, I shall abide untroubled and bid him do the same. I shall feed his mind on music and poetry, urging him to be content to leave the Hittites to mere name. And when you and I, dear reader, are like to be made desperate at the idea of all the outlines we have failed to master, let us eschew hysteria. Let us forget about the glands and the atoms and the reflexes. We shall heave Mr. Wells and Mr. Dorsey into the corner, temporarily, of course. We shall close our John B. Watson. We shall open our Wadsworth. For an instant, one is tempted to reply to such an avowal with an article entitled On Education for the Uncourteous. It may yet be needed, since Lee Wilson Dodd, himself a humorist, was writing not so long ago in the same periodical that he was through with pretty theories, or words to that effect, and would henceforth ask of a book only whether it left him better. This is a different revolt from Bennett's, however. It represents the weariness of one who has too long been held to lofty critical standards. It is an aesthetic spree, and I should not be surprised to hear that Dodd has recovered and has duly repented. Bennett, on the other hand, seems to feel that his reaction is temporary. He is returning to nature. Not even science may do without imagination. A heap of facts, however authenticated, requires a synthetic mind to acquire them into a significant group. The great scientist is a great artist as well, and that scientific or intellectual worker who deliberately chokes off all his feeling, instead of merely prejudiced manifestations of emotional inertia, is mistakenly sacrificing an essential. Yet, truth to tell, it is the artist type that needs to be warned against his neglect of the scientific aspect, more than the scientific type against the opposite error. I have met psychiatrists, for example, who are deficient in the appreciation of music. I consider this, on their part, almost a professional deficit, since one who truly understands the musical nature already is well advanced toward a sympathetic appreciation of the neurotic personality. I have met musicians, on the other hand, who never manifested the slightest curiosity in psychology, normal or abnormal. And yet, if they had, they would have been on guard against many futilities that they considered under the rubric of inspirations. The danger of Bennett's unction for the uneducated lies in this: it will make its strongest appeal to those who already rely too greatly upon intuition and loll in that sapping, fascinating dolce far niente called daydreaming. We need more and more knowledge, not less. Yet without the element symbolized by Bennett in the return to Wadsworth, that knowledge remains inert, knowledge, not wisdom. One of the greatest personalities now alive seems to have solved the problem so simply that I cannot resist the temptation to quote from his essay on Nietzsche. Even today, when so much has accumulated around the name of that paradoxical hero of the intellect, the Pascal of paganism, as Havelock Ellis so strikingly has called him, one may return to Ellis's essay with a pleasure that is compounded of the scientific and the artistic aspects. The entire life of Ellis, indeed, as his entire work, proves that it is not necessary to live in a succession of irritating reactions, now from intellect, now from an intuition, but that both may be blended in a fine harmony. We have done with absolutes. Pure reason, pure intellect, pure intuition are fairly pure nonsense. Thought and feeling are as inseparable as soul and body. Together they live, together they die. In an article published in the Savoy for October 1896 and entitled Concerning Jude the Obscure, Ellis had written, "A man cannot be too keen in grasping at the things that concern himself, too relentless in flinging aside those things that, for him at least, have no concern." The essay on Nietzsche had appeared in the same famous, if short-lived, magazine during the same year. It forms now one of the chapter in the book Affirmations, of which the first edition was published in 1898. Pardon me. Culture, writes Ellis, as Nietzsche understood it, consists for the modern man in the task of choosing the simple and indispensable things from the chaos of crude material which today overwhelms us. The man who will live at the level of the culture of his time is like the juggler who must keep a number of plates spinning in the air. His life must be a constant training in suppleness and skill, so that he may be a good athlete. Well, that word kind of fell out, didn't it? A good athlete. But he is also called upon to exert his skill in the selection and limitations of his task. Nietzsche is greatly occupied with the simplification of culture. He is forever challenging the multifarious materials for culture, testing them with eye and hand. We cannot prove them too severely, he seems to say, nor cast aside too contemptuously the things that a real man has no need of for fine living. What must I do to be saved? What do I need for the best and fullest life? That is the everlasting question that the teacher is called upon to answer. And we cannot be too grateful to Nietzsche for the stern penetration, the more acute for his ever-present sense of the limits of energy, with which he points from amid the mass to the thing which most surely belong to our eternal peace. Most of the contemporary to do with culture is, of course, insincere. For years, the parlor had become, for middle-class families, an obsolete room. In recent days, it returned, and naturally the parlor must have a bookcase. A bookcase must have books. So simple a chain of occurrences as this accounts for more than one private library. One of the most prominent booksellers of Boston told me shortly before selling out his business that some of his large orders were received somewhat in this form: "Send me $100 worth of literature to occupy a case consisting of 4 shelves about 34 inches wide." Our culture is manifestly quantitative rather than qualitative. Yet the very outlines against which Mr. Bennett enters his temporary protest may serve a great purpose, not only in democratizing knowledge, but in scrapping the rubbish of the centuries. Much of that rubbish has been derived from the undisciplined reliance upon the self-same intuition that he hymns. Consider, As an instance from a single period, the dependence of the medieval mind upon unquestioned authority, and the miasma of religion and morality that arose from the stagnant pools of that mind. Our intuitions have a strange habit of being conditioned by the facts we accept and the attitude in which we approach them. We cannot escape the facts. We dare not revolt from knowledge. They will seek us and find us out. At worst, we must effect a compromise. At best, however, we achieve a personal assimilation in the Nietzschean spirit as interpreted by Ellis. And that is the end of The Secret of Self-Development, Little Blue Book number 112, written by John Cowper Powell, copyright 1912. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next Little Blue Book.